You've heard the word inversion used to describe chords. That's a first inversion triad. That chord's a second inversion. In order to understand chord inversions, we really need to understand how chords are built, sort of the fundamental building blocks of how the structure is built so we can apply the law of inversion. Once we understand that structure, applying the law of permutation or inversion becomes very, very easy. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. Today you will learn about chord inversions. Now, if I was to ask you, well, how many times can you invert a C major chord? The answer to that question, if you don't already know it, lies in two different things. One is understanding the structure of that chord, and then understanding how to apply the law of inversion. And again, that's just sort of a middle school geometry type of thing. It's going to be easy. I'm going to explain how chords are built, just to level the playing field, because without the information of how the structure actually works, we can't actually invert it if we don't understand it, right? So I'm going to explain how chords are built. Very, very simple understanding of how chords are constructed. Then we're going to zoom in, and using the law of permutation and inversion, I'm simply going to show you how that structure inverts along the fretboard. Easy peasy. Tabs for this lesson, as well as every video on this channel, are always on Patreon, and that's linked in the description of every video. Head on over there if you want to grab the tabs, but also know that Patreon's the entry point for my teaching platform called The Studio. And in The Studio, I post weekly assignments for a group of avid and active curious guitarists. You can also register for live courses that I'm teaching. So I'm actually teaching these concepts to groups of guitar players all the time. So if you're interested in this stuff, this channel excites you, you like what I do and you'd like a little bit more, Patreon might be the great next step for you. Okay, chord inversions. Can't really invert what we don't understand. So let's get to the bottom of how chords are built, sort of level the playing field first. Chords come from scales. So here's a C major scale. The formula to make a chord is simply using that scale as a fabric and using every other note. So if we simply number the notes, root, that's the starting point, right? Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. And play every other note, we get root, 3, 5. Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root, we get root, 3, 5. To play that as a chord, all we need to do is take this note here, the fifth, put it on the next string. There's our C chord, right? You should recognize this as part of an open C chord. This chord only has 3 notes in it, but there are 5 notes ringing out here. Some of these are repeated. But here's our basic chord, right? Root, 3, 5. Let's take that root 3, 5, that structure, and put it on our hands right here as our little fleshy abacus. We're going to apply that law to this structure. So here's the root, the third, and the fifth. As we heard, the root is the lowest note, right? So in this core structure, our root is the lowest note. We can invert this chord by simply taking the root up an octave and making the third the lowest note. That's our first inversion chord. That's the first inversion of the chord. When we do that again and take these 2 notes and put them up an octave, now the fifth is the lowest sounding note, right? And that's our second inversion. If we did it again, the root would come back and be on the bottom. So there are only 3 inversions of a 3-part chord. Let's zoom in. I'm going to grab that first C major triad. We're going to invert it in a couple of different ways. Vertically across sets of strings, and then we're going to invert it across a single set of strings. Let's zoom in, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, let's put chord inversions on the fretboard where they belong. I'm just going to review what I just did. C major scale. Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. Building chords using every other note gives us root, 3, 5. Put this fifth on the next string. You've got a triad. Root, 3, 5 of a C major scale. There's our C chord, right? That's where we're starting. So the law of inversion simply says if you've got a 3-element structure, it inverts 3 different times. So let me put the structure down here. Root 3, 5. Here it is, root 3, 5. The root is the lowest note here. The law of inversion and permutation simply states this structure is going to have three different inversions, one with the root on the bottom, another with the third as the lowest note, and another with the fifth as the lowest note. We're going to find these inversions in two different ways. One is across sets of strings. Here's our first chord. We're going to find this chord, the next inversion on this set of strings. Then we're going to find the next inversion on this set of strings. That's the first method, across sets of strings, vertically. Then we're going to find the inversions along a single set of strings. So how does this chord invert along a single set of strings? Going this way, going up the neck, right? So we're going to do it in those two different ways. Let's just jump right in. Here's our C chord. The methodology for inverting chords across string sets is pretty easy. We take the lowest note and we simply take it up an octave. And we're going to add that octave of the root. Let's just prove out that this is the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. So we had this shape, and now we're adding the root on the top. And all we have to do now is take the root off the bottom, and we have our first inversion. Third on the bottom. The third is the lowest note now. Same methodology, just repeat that same thing. Take the third now. This is an E note. Take it up an octave. We're going to add that to the chord. And then we're just going to drop the third from the bottom of the chord, and we simply have the next inversion. 5 root 3. So let me just show you that again. Root 3, 5. Root up an octave. Take the root off the bottom. Got your first inversion. Third is the lowest note. Do the same thing. Take the third off the bottom. You've got your second inversion. Root 3, 5. 3, 5 root. 5 root 3. That's how inversions work across sets of strings. Pretty cool, right? It's already sitting in this chord that you already know. It's interesting to see that there are actually three inversions of the chord sitting inside there. It's really great to expose that kind of information. Next thing we're going to do is find inversions along a single set of strings, and that's going to be the first set of strings we started on. Here's our C chord, root 3, 5. I'm going to put that on the screen again. Even though the principle remains exactly the same, the methodology for inverting chords along a string set is a little different. So what you do on a single set of strings is you just take each one of these notes in the chord and you simply move it up along the string until it arrives at the next chord tone. So here we have root 3, 5. We're just going to use the structure of the major scale to move each one of these notes up to the next chord tone. So the root becomes the third. There's our third on the bottom on this set of strings. The third moves up to the fifth, 3, 4, 5, and the fifth moves all the way up to the root again, 5, 6, 7, root. Here's our inversion, 3, 5, root. Here's our first inversion, 3, 5, root. Pretty cool. Okay. The next thing we do is just take these notes, 3, 5 root, and again, using the same method, we just take each one of them and find the next chord tone on that same string. So here we are on the third, the next one up is the fifth, 3, 4, 5, right? This note here, which is the fifth, goes all the way up to the root again. 5, 6, 7, root. And our root simply goes up to the third. So let me just review those. Root 3, 5 becomes 3, 5 root, becomes 5 root 3. If we did it again, we'd end up in the same place we started. Watch this. Fifth on the bottom, 5, 6, 7 root, right? The next note in the scale is our root, so it goes up to the third. And And finally, our third simply goes up to become the fifth. 3, 4, 5. Same exact thing where we started. Isn't that cool? Now I just want to do one more thing, and that is listen to these inversions as we go across the string sets. They are exactly the same as this. Exactly the same notes, right? We've just done the exact same thing using two different methods, vertical inversion and linear inversion. Listen to this. Same exact notes. This kind of fretboard archaeology is critical. And once you start doing it, you can never go back. You can never remain simply a guitar player. You automatically begin the transition to becoming a musician who happens to play the guitar. Okay, there it is. It's not rocket science. In fact, it's middle school geometry, right? Should be easy to recall the law of permutation and inversion. And when you apply it to chords, you start to align yourself with how the fretboard actually works. This is how music works. And when you line yourself up with how things work, you open yourself up to massive opportunities. And all kinds of new information is much more easy to apply when you're sort of calibrated to how things work. Okay, go become a chord inverter. The very next thing to do is take any chord you already know, bring one of these along and some of this, right? And write down, find out where the root is, the third is, and the fifth. Like, do your homework, do some work here. And then find those inversions. Like, go and build those inversions yourself, both vertically as well as linearly up a set of strings. And then you become a chord inverter rather than a chord shape memorizer, right? Now you are free to build your own inversions because you understand it. What you'll end up with is a holistic mapping of major triads on the fretboard. Can't tell you how important and how impactful that idea is. So go get that. I hope that you found this interesting. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll see you next time.